Baiba, welcome to the Art of Feeling Better, my very own podcast. I am
Thank
really, really excited about our conversation today. Because as you know, I have been creating this podcast with some really, really incredible people. You are now added to that list of incredible people who are sharing some wisdom and we're just having some really good conversations globally, I think, at the moment around a lot of the topics that are really close to my heart and that are my areas of work. And the majority of last year since I started this, we've been having conversations around education, which is kind of how you and I met in person through the fabulous Anthony Willoughby, who was my very first guest. Actually, Anthony was the very first person that I headlocked into a corner in a hotel and put a camera in front of.
you.
So we got a chance to catch up in person, and we've met a few times online, but we caught up in October
Mhm.
in Amersham at this amazing gathering of fantastic people. And the topic has been around education and the troubles and the struggles and the challenges within the current system. And it was obvious to me from that meeting that there are so many different parts to that, and it impacts so many different areas of everybody's life. And it's why I'm
Mm,
so passionate about working with education and working with schools and predominantly with teachers to look at how we teach things and how we impart wisdom. And a lot of those pieces of work, when you dig deep into the roots, it comes back to the stories that we tell ourselves, right? The stories that as we grow into adults, our viewpoints, our values, our internal dialogue, and the way we live our lives. And a lot of that is down to what we learn as young people and
mhm.
what we learn from our cultures, our families, the media. And there's a really huge piece of work to do around the topic of money and wealth. And that's what we've got lots of things that we do want to talk about, and I'm probably going to invite you back for some more conversations. But this particular theme, now we're
Mm,
moving to the end of 2024 and cruising into 2025, I wanted to shift the topic slightly from
mm,
education. For me, everything comes back to education, so it's all connected anyway. But I think shifting from the education system into
mhm.
a new topic, which is wealth,
Yeah.
what that means. And it means so many different things to so many different people, doesn't it? And that is for me down to that early formative years when we are taught the stories and the meanings behind money. Is everything in
Mhm,
life around how many zeros you can get in the bank account and how
mhm,
many more zeros you can have than somebody else? Does wealth mean being able to wake up on a beach under the stars and have the flexibility to move around and not be tied down? Is that what wealth means? And it's subjective, isn't it? It's different to every person. But I think we have this incredibly toxic um, mindset in general around money,
yeah.
and especially as women. And this is what sparked our conversation around women. And you literally posing questions to me makes me really think, because my biggest block personally always has been my stories, my internal stories around money and wealth and what that means. So I've had a right journey, and I've gone into it in past episodes a little bit, but um, I'm going to keep pinging back to that as context as we kind of talk, because I've got so much that I can relate to kind of the conversation. But I spent many, many years in this mindset of money's really bad, money's evil, money's just a really horrible thing, and we shouldn't want it because of my own shit, my own childhood stuff, which is, stuff that we
Yeah.
need to work through. It's a distorted perspective from some kind of early trauma. And we impart these stories and then we behave around them, don't we? So I had this awful, awful money mindset for many, many years. And
Mm,
then I also had this layer on the top as a healer, as a medicine woman in my space around similarly around money. You can't be a good person if you are taking money for that. And if you
mm,
want to be a healer and help people, that should be, I need to nail myself to my cross and I need to sacrifice everything I am if I want to be a good person and heal others, which is a really toxic mindset. And it's
mm,
quite the opposite, I've come to learn. And I work with so many people in my community, predominantly women, who have this similar set of stories that I can relate to, and are
mm,
really passionately defending that space. That if I have more, then other people must have less, and I'm a good person, so that's not okay. I must sacrifice myself so that other people can have. And I bought into that for many, many, many years, and I justified a lot of my behaviors around that story until I had a little bit of a kind of penny drop moment. And I'm steadily working through that now. And I keep, it keeps coming back. So it's a behavior pattern. But once you step out of that space and start to realize that you need to rethink your relationship with money and wealth, especially as a woman, it opens up, doesn't it? Your whole landscape just wide open. You think, whoa, well, this is a different space to what I've ever been in before. So this is
Yeah.
really what I want to get into the roots of with our conversation today, and your perspective and your experiences with that. So I'm going to ask you, just first of all, just to introduce yourself a little bit about whatever you would like to share about you, your history, your work, your story, what you're passionate about, and what the kind of work that we're kind of starting to do together in terms of this amazing collective of people uh,
Mm.
around money and mindset and wealth. So I'm going to just hand you the floor for a minute and just talk about whatever you would like to talk about.
Oh, Jane. Well, thank you for that beautiful context and letting us all know where this interest in this topic comes, for you personally. I think you're absolutely right. It is a big conversation, and it's a conversation that especially us women need to have more, and we need to have more publicly and in open spaces, because it's easy to have these conversations behind closed doors when we can whisper to each other things about money, and already in those spaces feel intimidated by that conversation. But really stepping out of our comfort zone and having this conversation in open spaces and really holding our ground about it, and I'm sure we're going to go through into all of it. But first and foremost, I want to say thank you for inviting me to this conversation. I know that we already kind of like started this conversation that has sparked us to again come together from a space of closed doors into an open space and say, you know what, let's continue that conversation. None of this is pre-scripted, none of this is rehearsed. There's going to be a live raw conversation, and we're just like, let's continue that, but let's continue that in an open public space, and hopefully that will encourage other of our sisters, and not just our sisters, anybody, to have that conversation openly and publicly. So thank you for that.
Thank you for being here with me.
In terms of myself, so my name is Baiba. I am originally from Latvia. For those who don't know, Latvia is a post-Soviet country, and I say that, and I often don't introduce myself like that, but I introduce myself like that in this context because that will create context about kind of like the money mindset that I come from, based on how also the nation, the country of Latvia has been formed, because it has got a huge impact on how I have viewed and how I've been conditioned and socialized to look up money, and how many of those cycles I've needed to break over my lifetime. And I'm still absolutely in process.
I think we are. It's got an ongoing process.
It's a totally ongoing process. And so, yes, I'm originally from Latvia. I have spent all of my professional life in the West, predominantly in the UK, in Scandinavia. I've done some work also, in the US, and in some other places, around the world. But that's kind of like where I've predominantly been basing myself with my work. And my work at different times, there have been, a number of pivots, but I would say, predominantly my work has been within workplace culture, leadership development, and a lot around kind of like change management, team dynamics, that kind of work, diversity and inclusion. I think those topics also make you reckon with yourself in many ways. So as much as you kind of like engage in those topics, and I'm one of those people who doesn't necessarily engage in those topics simply out of a space of intelligence, and I don't necessarily treat my work as an intellectual entertainment, but it is a very experiential experience for me as well. And I find that I can my journey directly translates in the quality of service that I can provide to my clients and people and communities that I work with. So the more I work with myself, the deeper I take myself, the deeper I'm able to take the communities and people and clients that I work with. So hence I am a forever and forever, teacher and student in one person. And I totally own it and embrace it, and I love it. And funny enough, you mentioned the education space, and education space is something that I am very actively, as you know, moving into, and specifically in Latvia. And that is something that I'm still, processing, because that is something very new and very recent to me. And funny enough, just before our conversation, I was having a conversation with Delton, who's a mutual friend of ours, and we were just catching up. And one of the things that I was saying to her, because this is very, very recent, it only happened, last night during my kind of like evening meditation, and and we share a meditation practice, and so we were reflecting on that, and I was saying to her, that with me making a decision and a choice to move physically and metaphorically speaking to Latvia, and really bring my knowledge, my network, my resources to Latvia to develop the leadership skills, with the teacher community out here, it has really made me reckon with my identity.
Yeah.
My identity.
Mhm.
There are some identity shifts that are happening right now, because as I mentioned, all of my work has been in the West. All my professional life I've spent in the West, and now kind of like coming back to my home country where I haven't lived for nearly 15 years. There, I have changed, and she, as in Latvia, has changed as well. So there is, we are working through our relationship as well right now. So there are some identity shifts that I'm reckoning with right now. I'm reckoning with my current definitions and perceptions of success, of ambition, of aspiration, of wealth, right? Because that looks very different in this part of the world than it did, where I worked for a past, over a decade. So, but what I said to her, I said the interesting thing is, as I was meditating last night, and as I still had this kind of like doubt in my head, am I making the right decision? Is this the right move? Is this the place where I need to be? How can I financially and status wise and whatever makes sense out of this, how can I justify this to myself? And then what came to me was that money has brought me here, and money in terms of as an entity, as an elusive entity that I work with, as an energetic entity that I work with, that I consult with. And we talked about that last time, about, how I don't treat my business as a baby, because, many are like, oh, how is your baby doing? Are you not afraid of your baby? And I said, well, I've never treated my business like a baby. It's never been my baby. It's a grown ass woman. And I treat it as this entity, and I consult it, and I respect it, and I, work with it. And that's the same relationship that I also am, developing. And that's a relationship that I have with money. And so from that point of view, money as this energetic entity that I work with has brought me here. In terms of how and what that exactly looks like, I don't know, but I need to trust that that is exactly what has brought me here. And actually today I've woken up with much less doubt and more kind of like empowerment to do that work, and really trust that, again, that the right forces have brought me here. So gosh, I've covered a lot of ground there, and maybe I've already kind of like alluded some kind of like little paths that we can take with this conversation. But yeah, just wanted to kind of like set a little bit of context, where I'm originally from, and
Mm.
that, there is this, duality about me, with this kind of like Eastern European, but then I spent, nearly half of my life in the West, and now kind of like both of those worlds are coming together and colliding in a very, very real way. And what that is doing with, those definitions of the capitalistic, individualistic society, which are, your wealth, your success, your, all of those kinds of things. So yeah, there are a lot of things I'm reckoning with. So as we talk about it, I just want, the listeners to know that this is a very real process, for me and for us as well. And we haven't figured any of this out, but I just want the people to
Right.
know that, yeah, that we are all, processing, but we are also moving our feet towards something. And I think that's very, very important.
I love that about you, because I think we definitely resonate with a lot of things in common, I think, even though we move in very different spaces. And it's, for me, that walking the talk is the most powerful thing you can do. And it kind of separates you from that ego space. And ego is another conversation to have, because ego's great. We just need healthy egos, right? We
Mm,
need to have that right balance, but it takes you out of that space of that, as you say, that intellectual, I have this information in my mind and I'm going to tell you that information and you're going to act on it, is very different to you experiencing and working through that stuff as an expert by experience and sharing some wisdom and supporting your space and your community and yourself through that. That's powerful work, in my opinion. And being able to be vulnerable with that when you need to, especially as a leader. You know, you're similar to me. If you're working in spaces where you are coaching and you're looking in these sort of leadership spaces, being able to step into that vulnerability and say, actually, I need to go back and reflect and figure this out. And doing that together is a powerful piece of work. So, and that's tough, right? It's a hard piece of work to do, to move between those spaces. And I don't think it ever ends. I think it's just a part of life, isn't it? And it will always be. It's always about learning, isn't it? And it's always being the teacher and the student all at the same time forever. We never
Yeah.
complete life on expert level. And anyone who says they have is probably working through some stuff themselves. So I think this is, these brilliant conversations come from that space, and there's never a completed conversation. It's just exploration, isn't it? So yeah, so brilliant. That's great context as well, because I think that for me, I heard you mention some of these things when we were in Amersham. I thought, wow, what a space to be in, really kind of one foot in one space and one in the other. So that must be quite a challenge. But I know you have your own practices and you've got a lot that you do for yourself to be able to operate in that space. But it must be really challenging to combine those two spaces and to have a positive as opposed to a negative feeling about it. That whole, what is my identity? Where do I fit? It could go into a very kind of tricky negative space, or you could have that kind of superpower of, I have so much context and so much wisdom, and
Mm.
I've been able to collect from both spaces, and I can use that as my sort of body of work. How are you
Mm.
kind of finding that? Are you finding that particularly challenging now that you've
What a
moved?
beautiful question. Gosh, it feels more natural and healthy now, but it hasn't always been that way. Especially when the pandemic hit, and when, as a classic extrovert who was working in an office of 1,500 people, around people constantly, open air, open space, not no, open air, open space office, constantly people and bodies moving around, you're constantly interrupted, you are part of networking events, you're creating and hosting network, so you're always
Energy is always there, isn't it? Right? Yeah.
energy is always there. And now, you're made go inwards again, physically and kind of like metaphorically speaking. And so that was initially very exciting, because it allowed me, space to breathe and think and get excited. But then, after a year, after 2 years, you're like,
That forced reflection time is like, oh, this is
yeah, this is the
wow.
long reflection time, right?
Yeah.
But as part of that, I also was in a place where and this is very ironic actually, that I have done an incredible amount of travel during the pandemic when no one else was traveling, when everyone else was indoors. And this is not because I was looking for the resorts that were still open that would take me on, but I was in partnership with someone who was brought into critical infrastructure projects, and they were carrying on regardless of what was happening outside. And so as this weird plus one, like I was going, I was moving along. But it's also interesting that in all of these spaces I was actually not by choice, but by a circumstance. It was kind of like blessing in disguise that I was there. So, for instance, one of the projects was in South America, where we lived for a year, and that was during a kind of like late 2021, early 2022, and we know exactly what happened in 2022 when Russia invaded Ukraine, and there were 150 Ukrainian workers there, and it was very difficult for those Scandinavian and local companies to communicate with them from legal point of view, from practical logistical point of view, um, at that moment. Because a lot of the communications were handled through third parties out in Ukraine. That completely went out of the window. And as someone who speaks Russian, I was very quickly brought in to be able to support those people, kind of like feet on the ground. And you can't make it up. It's almost kind of like um,
Universe provides, doesn't it?
yeah, it's kind of like yeah, you can't make it up, and it kind of happened. But anyway, all that to say, by circumstance, I was actually traveling an immense amount during the pandemic, and to each of these spaces, when you're traveling with your, and for nearly, for whole 4 years, I was traveling, and when people was asking, where do you live, and I used to say. My address is my suitcase right now, very, very literally, because we kind of like, moved out of the UK, and we didn't have, any other base. And it was quite difficult during the pandemic to kind of
Yeah,
find base because it was a very weird time, right? And so yeah, for 4 years I've been laughing to people, yeah, my address is my suitcase. And that wasn't necessarily lying even, but yeah, so we lived in some, very remote places, even with traveling. So so as a classic extrovert, there was a real challenge for me. And what it really made me reckon with was that sense of belonging, because it
yeah,
made me look at, because now I was out of the UK, now I was out of Latvia, and I was looking at both of those places that are a huge part of me and be like, where do I belong? Because when I go back to Latvia, that's where my roots are. That's where my, some of my ancestors are from, because, our family is not necessarily from Latvia, right, originally. And it's like, yeah, but now going back, I'm not the same person anymore. Not necessarily people there, be it friends or acquaintances, can fully relate to me because I have changed. I'm different. I come with a very, very different mindset. I have cut and disrupted a lot of the cycles that these people still
right,
live within.
right, yeah,
Right, that they're still socialized and they haven't kind of like broken out of them. I have done that work, so that dynamic was interesting. So I'm like, yeah, I've got a Latvian passport. I've born there, but when you don't like, there's not like a full
different
sense of
space.
belonging.
Yeah,
Yeah. And some people had the audacity to say that I've got accent in Latin. I was like, "But I'm not buying that. That's like absolutely not buying that." No, yeah, exactly. Like, you stop it. And so and then of course, with Britain, I mean, as a an imperial, post-colonial state, if I could even say that, it's again all of my professional life is out there, but not as my roots are not there. I don't necessarily connect fully with their culture, with and other aspects of the nation or the state. And so it's kind of like, yeah, I've got a British passport, but I'm always going to be British. You're never going to be
I love that.
right. So you're never gonna be, like, fully belong in that space as well. You're always gonna be like, "Well, where are you really from?" "Oh, Eastern Europe." "Okay, okay."
Oh,
So
yeah, and then there's a set of assumptions that come from that, and then there's a
oh,
story around
mm,
that. So, yeah,
yeah, the first years were definitely, "Are you a cleaner? Are you a stripper?" Or yeah, so we've heard all of it. And I'm just looking at my, bookshelf because a friend of mine, Sally Moose, and she's absolutely fantastic, radio, TV personality in Dubai. And she, at the time, this must have been like 2021, she was interviewing Najwa Zabian, who is a Lebanese author, and she messaged me. She's like, "You must buy this book." And I bought this book, and it's called Welcome Home. It's an absolutely phenomenal book. And this book absolutely changed my life at that time, which it really invited me to build a home within me.
yes. Oh, I can't give you a real high five, but that is just
I'll take it. I'll take it. But the so yeah, so it was really interesting because at that time I was still kind of like you to be safe and secure and identify with a place or a space, you have to be physically there. So you have to be attached to some kind of infrastructure, to something, right? Something physical. And so this book, was absolutely phenomenal, where it really invited me to really look at building home within me, and actually um drop all of those, identities and labels. And funny enough, I was reminded of that by my mentor, David McQueen, who's absolutely phenomenal person. And I had a call with him, I think it was last week. And when we were talking about a lot of, my transition, and he was reflecting on some of the things that he's involved in. And he gave me, a beautiful reflection that actually I've been pondering on, that it very much kind of like creates a almost full circle moment from the time when I read that book for the first time. And he was like, yeah, you just have to focus on what's within you, what's dear within you, your values, and just drop everything that's external, drop the labels, drop, all of the, and I'm completely, rephrasing what he said, but that's why I kind of like took on, and it was lovely to hear that replayed back to me again, after so many years, and kind of be like, yeah, I already know that, and I just need to like have another conversation with me. So to go back to your question, it hasn't always been easy. It's been a process. It still is a process. And we're going to talk about it being a process, I think, throughout this conversation, whether we talk about wealth or anything else, is it is a process, but I think it becomes easier the more times you kind of have been through the journey of healing, of discovery, of curiosity, because you already have the tools, you have the questions, you know that you can handle it, you know that you are able to ask the right questions and receive or extract the pieces of wisdom that you need to hear and receive in that moment. And so as I'm reckoning with the transition that I'm experiencing right now, I am in an absolute space of surrender and deep knowing that I will receive the things that I need to receive out of it, and I'll receive the wisdom that I need to receive out of this, about be it my identity, be it my roots, be it my like whatever it might be. But it is it is a process, it is a process, and I think identities are also relatively fluid.
Yes, I agree. And when we can be in that space where we accept and realize that they're fluid, and then we can explore
Mm.
more. But I think you just, yeah, absolutely beautiful. And thank you for that answer, because I think that's going to make a difference to a lot of people out there listening as well. So I'm going to, two things that have kind of cropped up from that. The first one is dropping in nicely my body of work, because the whole point of me creating Mojo School, especially as an online piece of work, is for that very reason that you just mentioned, being able to support people very gently through the toolkit building process. So once all those tools are in your backpack, then whatever life throws at you, you've already worked through some things, and you've had some prompts, and you've had some activities and experiences, bit of knowledge, bit of experience, and you can draw on those within any given situation. So that's really sort of just made me reflect that, yeah, I'm on the right path myself, because this is exactly why I wanted to bring all this stuff into this kind of digital space, because it is so important when you're experiencing challenges, which life is going to throw your way. It's not about the absence of any traumas or difficulties. There's never going to happen. We can't do that. We can't remove these things or lock ourselves away behind this comfort zone that doesn't let us have any experiences.
Mm.
Have to, expand our comfort zones gently and safely, and build the tools in so that we can have these peak experiences and amazing adventures, and manage. I'd like to call it learning to surf. We manage the waves. The waves are always going to be there. We just need to learn to be better at surfing, is my thing. And with you mentioning, as if it was scripted, but it really isn't, the you being gifted these beautiful reflections, you've done that for me in this past couple of weeks. So there's two reflections that I've had, thanks to you kind of bringing me back full circle to the things that I actually teach and I know full well, but you miss sometimes in the day to day, don't you? So, and the first one is exactly what you were saying about that inner work. And I'm going to bring it to Anthony's territory map, because we did a territory map last week around that campfire. And I think when it comes to identity and placement and belonging, nurturing that campfire analogy, your resources, whatever they look like, that's for me that piece of work. And it doesn't necessarily mean a physical space. It could do, and that could be part of it, but it kind of helps you not put all of your eggs in one basket, and that's your only identity, is that one thing. It broadens it out so you have this whole recipe that makes you you. And I think that really, for me, helped with my sense of belonging and my sense of self, and made me feel a lot stronger in who I am and where I'm going, and my own story. And the second thing that I really just loved, because you mentioned it when you did your own map and we were having a chat about it, and I'm going to use this moving forward. And I've always known this, but I never really talk about it. And I think it's important to do that. And it's around
With the cranberries in the swamp.
the swamp, the swamp, and embracing the swamp. And my whole work as a practitioner, um shadow work is my thing, whether it's the psychological space or the spiritual space, science or spirituality. For me, it's the same thing. I'll just change my language slightly. My role, why I'm here, is to support people into going into their swamps or their shadows safely, exploring the goal, mining for gold, finding what it is in there that you can nurture and grow, and finding the beautiful, the cranberries and the lotus flowers, So I love that, and I think that for me brings me beautifully back to the kind of the topic of wealth and this money mindset, which I would just love to get some of your perspective on, because you really made me think this last couple of weeks that, I was giving myself these big high fives, and I always will do. I'll always celebrate the achievements, that I've come such a long way and broken out of some very, very toxic and very damaging money mindset from my past,
Mm.
right the way through my childhood, my teens, my 20s, my 30s. And only really recently, the last couple of years, that I've had some massive breakthroughs. So I've sat in this place going, "Yay me! I broke through. I've sorted that now. My money mindset's fantastic." And then you post some questions. I thought, "Oh, I'm on that beginning journey. There's a lot more for me to do," and it kind of brought me back to that. But the swamp for me has always had. Every time I've ever drawn out a swamp in a territory map, the money's always in there. The finance, the resourcing, the money is always a big, big issue. And until recently, I'd always thought of it as an external problem, that
Mm.
the the grant application process, the procurement process, the lack of funding here, that it's always things that are out of my control. And I just am always in this situation where money is always a barrier. And it's not until you kind of look at that inner, hmm, perhaps it's me that's the problem, that you start to really sort of pick through and learn to surf that particular wave. So give me some, let's kind of just shift the conversation for this next little bit to to being a woman, being a female leader, and having these stories that we've been conditioned to believe about our value, about our place in society when it comes to being able to access these, these kind of money spaces. And I don't know whether you've come across Tori Dunlap before. If you haven't, I'm going to send you something over, and I'll pop something in the link, because that was the first kind of breaking point for me. Financial feminist. She's great, and she has a program called Her First 100K, and she does lots of podcast stuff, lots and lots of wisdom around where some of these beliefs have come from societally, historically, and how we can start thinking a little bit differently and moving into these spaces. So I'll certainly pop some links up for there. But let's kind of start thinking about that as a topic. What's your perspective and your viewpoint on that, particularly for women? Because I know a lot of women are waiting for this conversation, because I've told them it's happening. And how can we start to reframe um, some of our beliefs that we're defending to the hilt? It's not our fault. Money's bad. Money's wicked. Money's evil. And thinking about some of the conversations that we probably shouldn't have, but I want to, around where wealth is currently sitting, and where this huge uneven distribution of wealth and money being kind of misspent in a lot of different spaces, and how that looks for you.
Wow, that's a big question, and it is making my money, oh
Oh,
gosh,
there you go.
my mind run in many different ways. Um, wow, okay, so I don't think I'll be able to give, one kind of like silver bullet answer here, but where as you were talking about it, where I feel like I want to start the conversation, and what was the biggest block for me was this concept of self value.
Yeah,
And you mentioned that, just a moment ago as you were talking about it, the self-value. And I think it's such an important, subtle yet important shift, because we talk about self-worth. We talk about
yeah,
self-worth constantly, but self-worth and self-value, not the same thing. And that is really important, first to reckon with, first and foremost. And that was, I think, my biggest breaking point, and the biggest shift
yeah,
as I started to very consciously and very seriously talk about, think about, and act upon the topic of value, wealth, and money. And so, yeah, self-value, and I love how the coach Jody Shields, who I'm learning from a lot, talks about this, and how she talks about kind of like this self-worth. And one of the exercises that we did was saying to ourselves, I'm not worthy. I'm not worthy. I'm not worthy. I'm not worthy, right? And you keep on saying that to yourself. And to me, that it didn't do anything to me, because it's here. I'm not worthy. I'm not worthy. Well, okay, I might not be worthy today. I'll be worthy tomorrow. Like to me, it didn't do anything. But when I tried to say, I'm not valuable, I'm not
Mm,
valuable. I'm not value. Even saying that, it gives me absolutely, like,
yeah,
literally, like, gives shivers, like, just, down my spine, because that hits on a very core level. That
yeah,
hits you on a core level because you might say, I'm not worthy of something. That's a block. That's a, that's a mindset pattern. That's a block. That's a condition. But that kind of like lives kind of like
yeah,
here,
yeah,
right? But when you try to say, I'm not valuable, oh, that hits you on a very like much deeper root level. And yeah, and I couldn't say it. I couldn't say it, but I realized that there is work for me to do around self-value
same for
to,
me.
to improve it, but I couldn't sell, but I couldn't say it out loud. I couldn't um, convince myself that I'm not valuable. And that was a very beautiful place where to start to really work with this. I'm value. And the moment you start building that foundation, and I think this is absolutely fundamental, um, that's where we can start having a conversation about wealth. Abundance was a big one for me as well, and I never realized it. Abundance was a huge one for me, and that was a big one for me to unblock and really start feeling abundance. Um, because again, I needed to work through that value piece. So that's kind of where I would begin that conversation as an absolute. That was the first step for me, and that's why perhaps I'm saying that's where we should begin the conversation.
I think that is, I think you're spot on. I think that's the root. And I think a lot of people will also resonate with that. And I've battled with this and I still battle all the time with it. And it took me a while to understand that difference, that subtle difference. And I'm trying now, we've just done a project out in the woods, an enterprise project with a group of amazing women, every single one, horrifically low self-worth, self-value, so the whole shebang. But it's trying to unpick all of those things. And we've had some really powerful conversations about it. And me sharing, I'm not on my journey and this is my experience.
Mm.
And for me, it took me a long time, and I don't know whether it's similar for you, being an extrovert, being self-confident. I'm happy in my own skin. My self-worth was actually okay. I know I'm good at what I do. I don't have any kind of, I thought I'd worked through a lot of that stuff, and I was particularly in a good place where I I know my space. I know what I want to do. I know who I am. I know where I am. I feel very confident. I speak on stages. I'm good at what I do. I know I'm good at what I do. I've unblocked everything, surely, but it was putting a value to that in monetary terms was the
Yeah.
big, big thing. And that's sometimes I think quite difficult to understand because you assume if you have that kind of persona of being super confident that it comes with it. But I think it's
Mm.
oh,
Oh, I love that you talk about confidence because again, this topic has been so so topical and acute for me this year as well. Where so I took a sabbatical last year, and a lot of people are like, "You took a sabbatical from your business?" Yes, I did. Yes, I did. For a record, yes, I did. No shame around it. I needed perspective. I needed space. I needed pivot. I needed to go through a transformation to be better for whatever the next step is. So yeah, yes, I did that. And funny enough, I went. This is just kind of like a side note because we talked about cranberries in the swamp. During my sabbatical, I spent maybe about 3 months in the woodlands in the mid of kind of like north of Finland, literally in the woods. I went completely inwards and detached
yeah.
myself from society and the grid and everything. And I just spent 3 months in the forest picking berries, including cranberries. I've spent a lot of time in a swamp picking
Picking cranberries.
cranberries.
You are the expert by experience then in that
Oh,
space.
expert by expert. Hence, I'm not afraid of swamps. Swamps are beautiful places. I've spent a lot of time in there, physically and metaphorically speaking. Um,
Oh,
but anyway, that's just a side note because we were talking about cranberries earlier. But so what the sabbatical did for me was absolutely phenomenal. At the same time, there were some unintended consequences of that sabbatical that I could never have thought that would come up. And one of those things was that it really put a big dent into my self-esteem. And
mm.
this was an interesting one as well because when I said it out loud to people, they're like, no way, like you're so confident. It's like, yes, I am. I'm confident and I lack self-esteem. Not the same thing.
Coexist, and it often coexists for sure. We need to
Right.
talk about that. It's another conversation that we have to have because it's so common, I think. It's so common. And people need to understand the differences between these things.
Right.
Confidence, self-esteem, self-worth, valuing oneself. They're all
Yeah.
connected, but they're all very different pieces. And my work in doing shadow work, the roots that need to be pulled up could be in any one of these spaces, and
Mhm.
explore them all to see what in your body, when you start to explore, the one that's the big root that needs pulling up will hit you in the feels, like you've just said. You'll
Gotcha.
go, oh, I don't like that at all.
Mhm.
Move into that swamp, baby, because that's where we pull out the cranberries.
That's why we find cranberries. And so, so that's about kind of like self-confidence as well. I think, yeah, we mix these terms and we kind of like put these terms in one bucket, yet they're not the same thing. And so, yeah, for me, it was, another thing that I've kind of like been like, oh, that's interesting. So I'm really, um, I'm working on my self-esteem now, coming out of, my sabbatical. So that was interesting. But going back to value as well, what you said, beautifully, um, because when we talk about money, when we talk about finances, when we talk about our business, we constantly talk about value. So what's the value of your services? What's the value of your business? What's the value of the work that you do, right? So we're talking about value in kind of in kind of like an impact sense, verbal sense almost, vision sense, and then we also talk about it in financial and monetary sense. So we constantly, as women, we are confident. We talk about value of our business, of our services, of so on. And yet, we often lack self esteem and we haven't reckoned with the value of ourselves. And so
Yeah.
we are sitting here like, oh, the work that I'm doing is like so amazing. It creates amazing impact. Why are all of these companies going and paying these people who are not doing half of what I'm doing? My business is amazing. And yet I can't get, half the money that I am asking for. And we are obviously, afraid of asking what we are
Yeah.
worth or what's the real value of it, because what's our value of ourselves, and they are so connected. So again, what we talked about, we are in relationship with everything. We are in a relationship with our business, we are in a relationship with our finances and money, we are in relationship with our debt,
Yeah.
we are in relationship with time. And so if any of these doesn't feel good, we really need to do an audit and audit our relationship with that aspect of us. And so, here is a relationship with, money, around value. So I'm asking for value. People are not paying me what I consider to be the value of it. So clearly they're not valuing me.
Hey.
Am I valuing me? So, and it's a very tough and uncomfortable thing to reckon with, but it's so liberating when we do.
Yeah, oh, completely agree, and I'm excited about the journey because it's a big work in progress, and we've had this conversation before anyway. I'm because I'm trying to walk the talk myself in my space with Mojo School. I'm excited to lean into that a bit more, and every time I get an uncomfortable feeling or conversation or experience, I'm like, oh, ooh, cranberries.
But you were so good. Like even on in our call, you're like, oh my God, like shadows are my thing, and you're like writing things down already. And but some people are like retreating into it, and you're like, let me lean into it more. And I think that's
That's very normal. It's a
amazing.
very normal response, and it's why I do so much preparatory work around the nervous system, because it's such a normal defense mechanism for survival. When our bodies give us something that's frightening or scary, we believe in that reptilian brain that we're not going to survive if we go into this space because it's so uncomfortable. But it's just our patterns. It's just something that was locked in at a certain point, or layers of things locked in at the
Yeah.
time that were meant to protect us. And we just create these parameters around them that keep us locked into that old space. So when we learn that and we learn how to regulate and we have some tools to manage our nervous systems, we can flip that slightly, stop the switch from flicking, and just have enough of an uncomfortable sensation to make your light bulb come on and go, yes, an uncomfortable sensation. I'm ready to grow. I have this growth opportunity. But that's a work, it's a practice, and that's the whole point of me trying to support people through that, to build that toolkit, because it doesn't come naturally. Quite the opposite. We repress, we deflect, we will just scroll on our social media, or we'll go shopping, or we'll use sex or substances or alcohol or work or anything else we can to avoid moving into that space of feeling uncomfortable. The irony is that's where the power, just on the other side of that uncomfortable feeling, is complete liberation. It doesn't last
Mm.
forever. It's temporary. You move towards it with resource and with support, process whatever's stuck, let the energy move through, right? Energy, emotion, we let that move through, and then we're in a different space and ready to move into another, there'll be another learning somewhere along the line. Such
Mhm.
vital, vital work. And I hope by these conversations alone, some people might think, there's a new thought for me. Maybe I can try that, or maybe, I can start to explore that concept further. Because if we don't have these conversations, nobody's ever going to know where that beauty lies and where that power lies. So I really want to keep having these conversations with people like yourself who are just bring so much rich wisdom to the table, and we can just start the conversations, because people are often afraid of even starting a conversation, especially around difficult subjects, because don't know where that's going to lead, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, because then you just have other conversations, and there's always going to be some good to come out of these spaces. And there's one thing that I want to touch on, and you may not want to touch on it, which is absolutely fine, but I'm going to just put it out there as a topic to move forward into next year, because I'm a community disruptor. It's kind of my vibe and it's what I do. So I really want to have this topic on the table as much as possible around um, corporate spaces and around some of the conversations I've had with many, many people around this massive imbalance of power, imbalance of wealth, imbalance of resource, where on the front line in all my spaces, we're having these conversations around the cost of living crisis. As you know, I work a lot with homeless community, food banks, poverty, suicide, all kinds of awful, nasty, traumatic spaces. And the vibe, the energy, the conversations and the stories in that space are, there is just no money. There is no money anywhere. We are
Mm,
just surviving at the moment in a society that has nothing, a cost of living crisis. We all need to, as a community, help each other, which absolutely we do, because that's the only way. Because
mm,
the grants are harder to get hold of. No one can get access to grants from charities. Local authorities don't have any money because they're all in a deficit. Government is in deficit. There's no money. Therefore, we all have to sit in a space of struggle, of lack, of poverty, and that's just the way it is. And that's where I've sat for a long time thinking, well, it's okay. It is what it is. Let's smile through it anyway, and let's just build our communities, and we can do it anyway. I've always had quite a positive viewpoint of that anyway. But I've
mm,
bought into that belief that, okay, that's the way it is. We need to build resilience. There is no money. But the last 2 years of conversations where I've been moving in different spaces, I've kind of flipped back again to, that's incorrect. There is money, there is resource, there's money, there's wealth, there's enough food for everybody, there's enough money for everybody, there's enough everywhere. It's just not in the right places.
mm,
I think that there's a conversation for us as human beings that we need to start to open up and explore around that topic, and what can we do about it, and how does it look, and what's actually happening. But I think there's also, and this is the only reason I'm bringing it up to ask you, there's also a conversation again as women around this. And I just wanted your perspective on that uneven distribution of power and wealth and resources, and how you feel we as women sit in that space and play into that space. And I'm keen as we move into next year to explore how we can move out of that space. And again, Financial Feminist is very good at articulating that, and giving tools towards that. But what, just for the next 5 minutes, because we're going to wrap it up pretty soon, but what's your thought process on that? I'm trying to articulate it the right way to ask a solid question. But how some of our money mindsets as women in terms of lack and value, how do you think we've got into this space when it comes to the differences between patriarchy, matriarchy, the kind of oppressive female space in terms of physical money and wealth? How do you think that space looks, and
mm,
where are we sitting now? Because I think we're moving through it. We're starting to realize and moving into these spaces of leadership, and lots of women are coming up into their space and their power, and accessing that kind of resource. Any thoughts around that?
Oh, wow. Okay. So the first thing that kind of like comes to me as I am feeling into the question is I think there are two predominant ways of how we as women move into the space of money or wealth. Let's call it that, spaces of leadership, whatever. One is through hustling, the hustle culture.
Yes.
through
I wore that
I
hat.
mean, hello, like we've all been there. And
Worked
once we've gone
harder.
through it, we are like, not how I want to be leading my life, right? Not my energy. And so this is the thing, right? So one is through hustle, where we replicate what we see creates money value, or rather replicate what we see achieves access to those resources.
Harder, work harder, work
But
harder.
so it's a very masculine,
Yeah,
alpha,
drive.
cutthroat energy. And so
Yeah.
we step into it. So that's kind of like one predominant part of how we get there. The other part, I would say, is through liberation, meaning that, we invest in, so we are like, actually, we don't want to be in those corporate spaces. And if you're not in corporate spaces, but in education spaces, in not for profits, it's very easy to be in exactly what you talked about. It is what it is. There are no grants.
Yeah.
Everything's taken. Everyone, like all of these public sector, councils and whatnot, are, on the brink of bankruptcy. There just isn't any money. So let's just, work on, good looks and good smiles, like whatever, right?
Yeah.
And just hope that one day, like we will be rewarded in some way.
And that gets you into hustle. It gets you into hustle without any
It gets
financial
you into
reward.
hustle,
Weeks,
right?
4 weeks without even any money, which is even worse.
That's exactly it, right? And so, but I think what the moment when we, as women especially, do the work around working through those blocks, those beliefs, how we've been socialized, how we've been conditioned for generations and generations and generations and generations, that we get access to resources through our own internal liberation. And we end up in spaces of historically no money,
Mhm. Yeah.
and we get access to money, right? So that's kind of like the first place where kind of like my mind goes to. And so what I want to say with that is, so before I actually say that, the other thing, what I've actually been thinking about over the course of this week, because I joined a session with Jody Shields, who I said, is, I see her as my business and financial mentor, I would say. She, and the conversation wasn't supposed to go there, but she talked out loud, and it's interesting how actually, as we are talking about it now, it comes back to me. And where she talked about, spaces of deep trauma. So that's your suicides, that's your addicts, drug addicts, alcoholism, all of these like very deeply dark
Mm.
spaces where people numb themselves, and they're constantly on, playing with a very thin line between life and death.
Yeah. Yeah.
In this frequency, living energy doesn't live in that frequency, and money is a living energy. So it's a bit of a kind of like a chicken and egg situation. Is it, if you were to give more money to someone who is in a, a dead energy frequency,
Mhm.
what would happen with that money? It wouldn't be
Can't
amplified.
it can't survive in that space.
No, no, it would just go down the drain instantly. It doesn't matter the amount. So it probably, many people won't like this response, because we all want a silver bullet, be like, do this and you're going to get, exactly what you're looking for. And actually I can say, do this and you will get there, but that will take work. And that work is leveling up your frequency. And I completely, right, assume that not many, drug and heroin addicts will watch these episodes. And maybe they will, and I hope they do, and there is some inspiration to them. But even those who are in slightly milder situations than that, and in a kind of like less dead, numbed, um, suppressed, oppressed energy, can start in, getting inspired and empowered by this. And it is very much the work of leveling up our frequency. And the more we level up our frequency, the more that living energy will start flowing, into our bank accounts, into our lives, through our relationships. Even if I look at the past kind of like couple of years of my own life, both financially, relationally, gosh, it's night and day of where I was, let's say
Same for me.
right at the beginning of the pandemic versus, where I am now. And not much has changed. The only thing that has changed is the stories we tell ourselves and the stories we tell about ourselves. So, and the labels we attach to those things and identities that we attach to those things, right? There are some identities that are healthy identities that we want to keep, but there are many that are, again, are societal, that make us kind of like, you're that or the other. And again, creating a polarization often within ourselves, right? So yeah, I will leave, and I'll answer, sorry, that question with a very elusive answer and say it is about leveling up our vibration and our frequency, and then and kind of like lifting ourselves up in a very nurtured, energized, flowing, for women, wet space, soft
Yeah.
space, where these things can come in, where we can create, because we are the creators, right? Where we can create, where we can nurture, where we can grow, where we can birth these amazing things. But birthing is creating something alive, and it comes from a live energy. But if we are completely numbed and kind of like, yeah, kind of like between life and death, money that is alive, very vibrant, very dynamic, and it just doesn't live in those spaces. So yes, it is the system. It has done a lot to keep us in that space. The capitalism, the patriarchy, all the isms that come with that, absolutely keeps it there. And we can't expect that system will come to us and be like, okay, let me help you liberate you. It ain't gonna happen. It ain't gonna happen, right? We can't expect our perpetrator, whether it's another human being or a system, to come and liberate us and apologize for it. They ain't gonna happen. We'll wait all our lives, and we'll wait for another 10 generations.
That's up for its own ends. Why on earth? It doesn't want to change. I am so glad I mean, I feel like we've scripted this, but we haven't. I'm so glad that you've moved into that space to answer that question, because for me, everything is energy. It is, that's what I do. And the system, the patriarchy, all of that, it's energetic frequencies, all of it. And
Right.
I mean, even taking out the kind of whole gender debate, because for me, energy is energy and human beings are human beings. However, we do have this polarizing divine feminine, divine masculine energy, and we've been so out of whack for so long. We're trying to build that balance back now. And our role in that feminine, divine feminine, female energy is to bring that up so that we can get some balance. It's not about flipping over the line into a matriarchy either, because that's just as toxic. It's just bringing our power out. And we have to do that with the power of creation and our specific way of doing that softly, as you say, and as women, not trying to do it the way that we see people in power doing it, because that's not work.
Mhm.
It's not great. We have to do it in the way that our ancestors and the medicine women knew how to do it and were oppressed from doing it when this happened. We need to use that and help power ourselves back up to get some balance to support the whole. And I think, I don't know whether you've read, there's a book by Dr. David Hawkins called Power versus Force. Brilliant book. If you haven't read it, I'll send you the link. I love it. I'm going to reread it again for the eighth time. And there's a chart in there, and it's around frequencies of emotions. And it really helps me to articulate exactly what you've just said. And there's an actual number, numeric frequency in hertz of emotions and how they vibrate, and apathy at the very bottom, and then moving up towards fear and moving up towards anxiety, and moving, even anger is better, because there's some action attached to anger.
Mhm.
It's one step away from courage. And it shows this kind of vibrational frequency of moving up. And that kind of brings me to exactly what you just said. We do need to think about this, and we need to have spaces where we can support one another to level up our frequency. And that is exactly how manifestation works. It's not a magic woo-woo thing. It literally is increasing or raising your vibration, changing your mindset and acting towards that, and then it sort of magnetizes what you're looking for. But if the mindset's not in the right place, you can have as many vision boards as you like, you can use the word manifestation, and you will
Mhm.
constantly wonder why you're in this loop and pinging back into this circle. So the last thing I'll mention, and I'm not going to ask a question with it because I've got three very specific questions to ask you in a second, but I just wanted to touch on the space, because I know a lot of people that are listening potentially in a coaching space or in a therapeutic space. A lot of my audience are. With what you've just said, Baiba, and what I've just said in mind, we cannot try and provide a magic bullet, a silver bullet. We cannot try and fix these problems, because then we perpetuate and we feed into this toxic space where people stay in that low vibrational space of wanting to be fixed. And we have these horrible codependent relationships where the fixers who are stuck in their trauma drive, the therapist, the psychiatrist, the psychologist, are all in this space of wanting to be validated and valued through their ability to fix something or someone. It's childhood trauma wounding coming up to play. And then the people who are still vibing low are stuck in this victim space of, well, I just need someone to fix everything. And if there's a problem, that person will give me a silver bullet to fix it. And they're never gifted the opportunity to move into that healing space where they can transform. So even if you feel like you're fixing and you're doing a great thing, actually, we're kind of part of the problem. I've spent many years in that space being part of the problem I'm actually trying to fix. So there's no way out. We all have to be accountable and responsible for our own inner work. We have to do it. We've got to do the inner bit, and the rest will flow. And it impacts not just you, but everybody around you, and the space around you, and the energy around you. So, yeah, that for me, that's the fundamental message: is it has to come from the inside.
Yeah.
So
Can I say
yeah,
just
of course,
one thing?
of course.
Because this is so important. I just literally just want to piggyback on what you said, just to solidify what you just said. It absolutely is our responsibility. Like us, we are our responsibility. You know, that inner child that didn't have the adult um that it needed when it got traumatized, or that, you know, when it was wounded or hurt. We are that adult now, and we need to take care of ourselves, because it's so easy to say, oh, you know, my family, my father was drinking and it was, you know, violent, and then my mother left us, and then, you know, I grew up in a space with no money, you know, council estate, and I grew up in a state that was violent and oppressive and, you know, occupied, you know, potentially, and whatnot. And that's a space, you know, kind of like, you know, where I come from in many ways. But and yeah, and it's an education system was, you know, flawed and whatnot. And it's so easy to be like, and that, and I'm the product of all of, you know, and I am. But now I am my problem. I am my responsibility to stop blaming everything and everyone, and start taking care of myself, and start taking accountability and responsibility. What I say, how I show up, what's the, you know, value that I add. Because, you know, there's so many people still, you know, full on grown adults who are leading some of the world's most valuable companies, the biggest brands, who are there, who are blaming everything and everyone, and a lot of their work comes from a space of hurt. And that's why we are, you know, in these spaces that just don't, you know, yeah, there's a lot of money, but they just don't feel good. The energy is so thick and dark that you need a chainsaw to get through it, right? And so yeah, we are our job, we are our life's work, we are our responsibility. And if anything you take out of, you know, this conversation, I think it is that.
And hurt people, right? It's a famous saying. And we have people in leadership roles all over the world, in governments, in corporate spaces, who are deeply wounded and masking so much, but they are now responsible for a lot of the things that are happening. And it's all from a place of darkness and hurt and wounding that's never been fixed and healed. And we can't do anything about that, but we can do our bit. And I think that is definitely the takeaway from this, that we are not responsible for the things that may have happened to us in our lives, but we're accountable for how we choose to heal from them and move forward. That's my mic drop moment.
Yes, total mic drop moment.
So I am going to ask you three questions now.
Okay.
So I've asked every single one of my guests because I wanted to try and compile a little bit of a toolkit for this podcast. So the art of feeling better is the title. It's how we kind of work together to support each other feeling better through this process. And I thought if we could all have the same questions, then we can build this little collective toolkit that I'll share at some point in a more succinct way. And the first question is a really big one. I think we kind of answer this through the conversation, but just to kind of put it into, you know, a little bit of a paragraph. Um, what do we need to do? It's a big one. It's like the macro level. What can we do to change the world for the better? What
Mhm.
one thing in your perspective would bring about a big shift?
Change yourself. Start with yourself.
Mhm.
Start with yourself. That's how we
Yep.
change the world. I that's the end and the beginning of it.
The only thing, isn't it, is that it's the one thing that will actually make the difference. Ironically, it's the one thing that will make the difference, and it's the thing that most people run away from.
Right, because we wanna fix the world, and we wanna be the fixers, right? And we'll do everything to fix the world, but we
We
are
can.
the world, right? in many ways, and it's crazy, like, how many people we have the power of impacting. It doesn't You don't need to travel, across the oceans to the other side of the world to change the world. Your world is your family, your community, your town, your city. Just start with yourself, start with those spaces, because that is the world.
Imagine billions of people all doing that. Imagine
Mhm.
the impact and the energy. That's how you change the world, literally.
Yeah,
That's the
literally.
distillation of how you actually change the world, is stop deflecting and trying to fix things,
Yeah.
fix these bits, and the rest kind of just falls into place. But the most beautiful answer, I love that.
So much power in that. Thank you.
Helpful, thank you for that. So from the big to the slightly smaller, is there one particular tool that you use that might be supportive on a daily basis? One small thing that people out there can add into their little toolkit just to help feel better during the process? We're going through some stuff at the moment. Is there something that helps you in your life that we can pass on as a tool?
Breathe. Just breathe. Oh,
Ooh, that was an interesting
oh,
universe.
look at this. Look at this. What just happened?
Just
I
breathe.
just um, yeah, just breathe. I mean, when everything else feels out of control, which most of the time it does, and it is, the only thing that is the realest thing is our breath, our spirit, that we are. And that is my practice that I practice every single day. That has gotten me through some very dark and heavy points of anxiety and panic attacks and all kinds. It's always been down to this minuscular thing that we forget about, and our body, and we forget about ourselves. And the breath allows us to be here and now and move away from being worried about the past or worried about the future, being in the space of aversion. So, being in the space of, anger, getting rid of something. This is not good, let's remove this out of, my life. Or in the space of craving, I need to get more of this, and attachment, and all of this. So the breath allows us to be here and now and be present. So yeah, just the
Yeah.
the smallest and most profound one is just breathe.
Free. It's a free resource, right? We just don't we're not taught how to use our breath effectively. It's
No.
probably my biggest tool actually when I'm doing, moving into that challenge response space. I have to use specific breath work. If I'm shifting from my crazy visionary brain, cosmic downloads, lots of fuzzy stuff going on, and I'm
Mm,
shifting into a space of meditation, because of my practice, there's a very quick process for me now because I
mm,
have a practice that helps me flick that switch. And I love that because I can be super creative and then I can be really reflective and calm my nervous system just through breath. It doesn't cost anything, but we have to learn. We all think we know how to breathe. We
yeah,
don't. We know how to
no.
survive. We know how to intake a bit of oxygen to keep our bodies going.
Mhm.
We don't learn how to actually breathe. And for me, on the curriculum, we could change something, teach kids how to breathe properly, to manage themselves and to be present. Love that beautiful answer. And we're going to be putting more and more resources as well. There's a whole breath work. Find your breath, find your flow. There's a whole course on Mojo School, just introducing that concept and a little bit about it. But I'd like to get some more special guests and people to come in and do some breath work so we can add some more tools to that toolkit. So thank you for that. Beautiful
Okay.
answer. Final question, and I've told you this already. I gave you a little sneak preview that we've got this Spotify playlist, which it's getting so much bigger now. It's a really cool Spotify playlist. Same title as the podcast. It's called The Art of Feeling Better. And I would love to add your favorite feel good tune onto the end of it so we can build this lovely community feel
Oh.
good playlist. So you have something for me, your favorite feel good.
Oh, there's so many. So money. Like I keep on saying money, right?
No
There's so
money.
many. Money is here with me.
Wow.
Uh, there are so many actually. Yeah, depending on how I need to kind of like raise my vibration. But yes, I did have a sneak peek of your playlist, and I think it was absolutely beautiful. So I would love the song that I'd love to add to it is I think the artist's name is SZA, SZA, and the song is called "The Good Days" or "Good Days," I think it's called, and it's not an actually yeah "Good Days." It's not actually a brand new song. It's not a new song in any I think shape or form. But funny enough, I came across it or it found me relatively recently, and I've just been playing it on the loop, and I just love the music. I love the rhythm in it. I love the lyrics of it. So yeah, it's a chilled one, and SZA's got obviously a beautiful voice. So yeah, that's my gift to paying it forward.
It's on. As you were speaking, I found it and it's on the playlist. So
Oh, let's
I'm gonna have
go.
a to that and a bit of a bop later. And we've got such a nice assortment. We've had so many just brilliant songs that I've never heard of before. And I've been able to kind of, have a listen and learn some new things and have some more feel goods. And we are all about the chemical feel goods, and music medicine for me is one of the most powerful. And breathing and music medicine and nature, the big three for me is those three things are powerful medicine and free most of the time. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's a lovely playlist. And as you know now, when my workshops and when I'm doing mapping, I'm using songs that people have chosen and things that relate to the metaphors, and that kind of helps the process as well. So yeah, I think it's a nice little resource, so everybody can have a little listen to that. So, David, thank you so much. That has been such a rich and brilliant conversation. And I know that there's so many more things to speak about across these topics. We really just scratched the surface, but we've opened the floor and opened the space for that, I think, now. And it will take me into a new direction in the new year around this topic of wealth. And I would love to carry on at some point. And if you fancy coming back, and we'll pick something else
Oh,
to
I would
look at,
love to.
or we'll go dive deeper. And then maybe if anybody wanted to comment, if there's any suggestions, feel free to pop them in the comments, and we'll carry on the conversation. Let us know what you
Love
want.
that. I'd be honored to. And yeah, and if there's anyone who wants to comment, like the certain things that you'd like to see us go into more detail, I'd love to come back. Because as you said, we've just, this has been just introduction, this whole call. I think we've shared some amazing, tools and we talked over some practices. Oh gosh, there's so many directions that we can go with this topic. And I think it's such an important topic to talk about now at the end of 2024, as we go into 2025 and beyond. So yeah, I'd love to keep on having this conversation.
Well, I think we need some guidance, so we need some comments. Whatever platform you're viewing this on, we could do with some comments to guide us towards which bit comes next. So let us know what you want to hear more of, and I will pop some links in the bio and in the description for some of the things that we've spoken about. And yeah, and I just wanted to wish everybody a lovely holiday season and a nice little break if you're able to take a break, and just send you lots of love, Baiba, and thank you so much for being part of this conversation, because I think the more we can do this, and the more people we can get in the room and just have these honest, authentic explorations,
Mm.
yeah, the more we can raise your vibe attracts your tribe, right? So the more we can raise that vibe by speaking and talking in these ways. So thank you.
And so every single year I select an anchor word for myself, and I've already selected this anchor word for 2025, like back in October, and the word is audacity. So that's my word for 2025. And I think it takes a lot of courage and audacity to talk about these things, money and wealth, considering how much of a taboo topic it is especially among the communities, women, people of color, like
Yeah.
disabled people, like, everyone apart from certain demographics.
I was going to name and shame them. We all know what certain we all know. I've talked about it
Right.
before.
And so I would love to come back with in this energy of audacity to have even bolder conversations around these taboo topics that should never be taboo.
Let's do it. Let's have some taboo conversations. I love
Let's
it. I
have
love
some
it.
taboo conversations.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Jane, for inviting me. I love this conversation. And you asked some phenomenal questions. Let me just say that.
Thank you. And they just, I mean, I hope so, because they just kind of come out. So I'm glad they resonate.
Oh, I loved having this conversation because not enough people, not enough, I think, not enough podcast hosts ask these very meaningful, deep questions. And yeah, it will be interesting even for me to go back and re-listen to it, because I think, because I talked a lot kind of like in the moment, and I'll go back and listen to my own wisdom, whatever was channeled through me in that moment.
I always do that with these conversations, and I always pick out extra bits and think, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize that was.
Right.
And it's great. That's why I'd rather have non-scripted conversations and real,
Yeah.
authentic, proper ones. So thank you so much.
Thank you.